Hey, happy friends. Real Pablo coming at you once again. The only man on YouTube with a face for radio and a voice for print. My last two hobby rules, my first two hobby rules, were about empowering me as a gamer to do the things that I really want to do in the hobby. The third rule is the same. These three rules kind of round out how I feel about hobbying in general and remind me that when I sit down at the table or when I sit down on my computer, to play, to create, to explore, that it's really about me, right? And when you game, it's really about you. You have fun. You you make the hobby your own, your hobby your way. The third rule, originally sort of incorporated watching a lot of videos about Warhammer 40k and the Warhammer mythos in general, and people, especially British people, always refer to Warhammer as the hobby. Warhammer 40k is the hobby, and I've seen that also with D&D videos to a lesser extent. D&D is the hobby, as opposed to being part of a more overarching hobby experience. And so, the third rule of hobbying, Bo's third rule of hobbying, the hobby is not Games Workshop, and Games Workshop is not the hobby. Dungeons and Dragons is not the hobby, and the hobby is not Dungeons and Dragons. Whether it's wargaming or tabletop gaming, tabletop wargaming, you remember that it's part of a much, much broader experience, and there's so much more out there in the world than just these two companies. There's more to the world than Hasbro, despite owning pretty much every IP from my childhood at this point. I really want to empower you as a consumer and a customer of hobby products to remind you that once you get off the beaten path, there is so much more out there. So many games that are not SRD, OSR, D20 related. So many miniatures games out there that are not Warhammer, that are not made by Games Workshop, whether they're one-page rules, Space Weirdos, you name it, for crying out loud. Stargrave, Frostgrave, so many games. But, sort of related to my previous video about being alone in the hobby space, I think sometimes people feel that they have to get involved with these games because if you walk into your local, more mainstream or even indie game shop, hobby shop, the three products really that you're guaranteed to find at any hobby shop in America are Dungeons and Dragons, Warhammer 40k / Age of Sigmar, and Magic the Gathering. And there are companies out there, or people out there, that would have you believe that these are the only three options at all for hobby. I walk into my local mainstream game store filled with copies of Settlers of Catan and Dungeons and Dragons and all of its iterations, and maybe a little bit of Pathfinder, plus Warhammer, and I say, why do you only have D&D? And they'll say, because D&D is the only game that people buy. And you ask people why they play D&D, and they'll say it's because D&D is the only game available at the game store. So they caught in this vicious consumer cycle. And I think that it sort of it adds to that notion that D&D is the hobby and that the hobby is D&D. And so what I'm encouraging people to do is, even if they don't entirely walk away, like some of us have, and look for other venues, at least pause and really consider why that is. And do your best to maybe break that cycle. D&D is not the hobby, and the hobby is not D&D. There are other options out there. There are other options that are not D20 based. Because, as I've said in other posts, I mean, OSR is still D&D. it's reskinned D&D, and maybe it's D&D with a different attitude, but it's still D&D. So if you want to break out of that, or if you just wonder why that is, and if you wonder why you're alone with that perspective, you're not. It may feel a little bit like a Kafka novel sometimes to walk into the store and find nothing but wall-to-wall D&D. Maybe a little bit of, maybe they might have one copy of OSE or Fudge or something like that in the back corner. But it's a great big world. And to summarize, the hobby is not one corporate interest or two corporate interests. The hobby is a great big world. It's got a whole many slippery, slimy appendages, as Avenger would say, many tentacled appendages, from hobby painting and 3D printing and tabletop and all manner of wargaming and role-playing games, both ROLL and ROLE, as Wargamer Fritz would say. So these three rules sort of come together and just really empower you as a consumer and as a creator. So make your hobby your own, have fun, and remember that it's not a matter of corporate ownership. Own your own hobby. Peace.